Well, it's Wednesday, halfway through the week, and just about halfway through the book of Revelation. We're in chapter 11 today, and really what's on display here is God's just infinite compassion, even during the midst of this horrible tribulation here. Again, I've divided this up into some bite-sized pieces here. The first big section, verses 1 down to 14, I've labeled the two witnesses. And then from verse 15 through the end of the chapter, I've labeled that the seventh trumpet sounds. So that's what we see today. The section on the two witnesses opens with verses 1 and 2, talking about the temple in 1 and 2. So this is the third temple. Kind of the history of the temple is that Solomon, of course, built the initial temple, the first temple, which was destroyed in 586 BC. And then that temple was rebuilt by Zerubbabel, kind of a mouthful name there, but was built by Zerubbabel and then was expanded on by King Herod. So Herod began a building project in about 20 BC, and to expand that temple significantly, and it ended in about 65 or so AD, in my recollection, just in time to be destroyed in 70 AD. So there's an 80-year government-sponsored building project. We see those today, in fact. But Herod expanded Zerubbabel's temple, so that would be the second temple. This temple during the tribulation now is the third temple. It's the Tribulation Temple. Some call it Satan's temple because the abomination of desolation that Daniel and Jesus talked about will be appearing in this temple. But it's yet to be built. There's activity and desire in Israel today even to rebuild the temple and preparations for that happening. I think over the last couple of years, they've even had a sacrifice on or near the Temple Mount in preparation for this. So there's active movement to begin the process of building this temple. Again, in my view, it's not necessary that the church be raptured before the temple is built. It's only necessary that the church is raptured before the temple is completed. So that would be my view. So this is the third temple. Notice also that it's given over to the nations for a certain period of time. So what this is talking about, I think, is what Luke in 21:24 refers to as the time of the Gentiles. So the time of the Gentiles began when the last Davidic king was taken off the throne of David in Jerusalem. So this would be about 586. And it's continued to today, and it will continue until Jesus is again on the Davidic throne in Jerusalem. That will be the end of the time of the Gentiles. Until then, that area is given over to the nations. The timeline is given in verse 3, so the temple in verses 1 and 2. The timeline in verse 3, notice that this is God in charge. He's granting authority. It's his two witnesses. He determines how long that they will prophesy and how long they're going to be there. So God is totally in charge. And in verses 4 through 6 of this section, we see the traits. So we see the temple, the timeline, and now the traits of these two witnesses. And again, this is one of those areas of the book of Revelation where there's lots of speculation about who these two witnesses are. The reason there's so much speculation is they combine the traits of prior witnesses of the Lord, particularly from the Old Testament. So often people see, for example, Moses and Elijah. Again, thinking perhaps these are Moses and Elijah back on the earth. Enoch and Elijah. Zerubbabel and Joshua the priest. Not Joshua the leader, the conqueror, but Joshua the priest. And my view is we simply don't know. So again, I think that we have lots of echoes of the Old Testament in the book of Revelation. These echoes of the Old Testament are proof to the faithful that God is able to do all these things because he has done them in the past. He has done this work, this witnessing work through prophets in the past, which gives us confidence that he will do this again in the future. But it's simply that they haven't revealed who these witnesses are. So we see the traits of the witnesses in verses 4 through 6. And again, when you look at what they're able to do, it reminds us of people from the Old Testament, prophets of the Old Testament, the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands before the Lord of the earth. I think that's talking about the empowerment of the Spirit in these men. Fire pours from their mouth like Elijah. They shut the sky and no rain may fall, again like Elijah. Water turns to blood like Moses, brings plagues like Moses. Again, I think it's not so much the personalities that are involved here as the fact that God has worked through men before to do this and he will do it again. Gives us confidence. Then in verses 7 down to 10, we see the termination. So we've seen the temple, the timeline, the traits, and now the termination of these 2 witnesses. Again, when they had finished their testimony. Wasn't before, wasn't longer. It was when God had determined they had finished their testimony. And this, I think, is kind of the final summons that God is making through these final 2 witnesses. That just as Jesus' death on the cross was a call for salvation, so these final 2 witnesses in the same place are calling for salvation one last time. That's why I think we see here the compassion of God. Also notice in verse 7 that we see the beast being introduced here. This is the first time we're seeing this creature. It's going to be pivotal through the rest of the book. But he's introduced right here. And again, the beast is limited to what he can do. They lie dead in the street for 3.5 days. So just as God had determined how long the witnesses were going to be witnesses, how long they would be alive, so he determines how long they will be dead. And then he raises them from the dead, and he takes them up to heaven. And again, as Jesus ascended to heaven, was a witness to the faithful, so this will be. Also want to point out how the dwellers on the earth in verse 10, these earth dwellers, rejoice. This is the only time in the book of Revelation that they're said to be rejoicing. But their rejoicing turns to terror, which is how I labeled verses 11 through 14. When he sees them raised, they see them ascended into heaven. It throws them into terror. Verse 15 talks about this trumpet that's about to sound. Our amillennial friends will look at this and draw a parallel with 1 Thessalonians 4:16, where the final trumpet sounds. They say this is symbolic of the rapture of the church. I don't think there's a parallel there. Just because it's a final trumpet doesn't mean it is the final trumpet. Perhaps the final trumpet for the church in 1 Thessalonians 4:16 and not for the world, as we see in Revelation. So finally, so that's just to summarize the 2 witnesses then. Verses 1 and 2, we see the temple. Verse 3, the timeline. Verses 4 through 6, their traits. Verses 7 to 10, their termination. And 11 through 14, then the terror that falls on the earth. Just point out that not only are there 7,000 people in Jerusalem killed by an earthquake, but in today's measurements, I guess, that would be 5 square miles of the city devastated. So this is, again, a final call, a final warning to those on the earth. And then the 7th trumpet is blown. As we've seen in the past, when the 6th seal was open, then the 7th seal was open, then the trumpet judgments sounded. Likewise, when the 7th trumpet sounds, the final 7 bowl judgments will be poured out. Now we have this interlude in heaven, so we won't see those bowl judgments and see their description until chapter 16. But what we see here is the result of those bowl judgments. The final kingdom is coming, that this is anticipating what's going to happen. Picks up the chronological narrative, I think, from chapter 9, verse 13, and anticipates the bowl judgments, as I said, in verse 16. I think what we see here in this final section and in this poetic section, giving thanks to the Lord God Almighty, as we see really the answer to the prayer of Jesus' disciples in chapter 6, verse 10 of Matthew. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. I think that's what we see here, is that the kingdom comes at this point. God's will is done on the earth, that it's completed. That's what we're praying for as Jesus' disciples. That's what we're looking forward to and preparing for. We see God's temple in heaven is opened, the true temple, the temple where Jesus has been ministering and is ministering with us and for us right now. He's bringing our prayers before the Lord. Our prayers come before the Lord because Jesus has opened the Holy of Holies by his blood. So that heavenly temple now is opened. We see the Ark of the Covenant there, and just a tremendous, incredible vision of heaven here. So, God bless you, brothers and sisters. Have a great week as we head into the last couple of days as we make our way through the book of Revelation. God bless you.